Commander Zekthor stood at his station and looked at the screen in front of him with confusion spreading through his entire body. The sensors were showing something that should not exist in this part of space. His three eyes focused on the data that appeared again and again with the same impossible result. A ship was moving through the Kelros expanse, and that ship carried human signatures. Zekthor felt his breathing change as he realized what this meant. Humans were not supposed to be here. Humans were not supposed to be anywhere except their home system. The quarantine had been in place for 600 years, and it had never been broken before. The containment field around the Sol system was built by the best scientists in the galaxy, and it was supposed to be completely impossible to breach. He turned to his tactical officer and spoke with a voice that tried to stay calm but failed. Pelkun was young and inexperienced, but he knew how to read sensors. The young officer checked the readings 3 more times, and each time his face showed more worry. The data did not change. A human battleship was operating freely in neutral space, and its designation was USS Dakota. Every species in the galaxy knew the rules about humans. They stayed in their system because the Galactic Council had decided it was necessary after the First Contact War. That war had been short, but it had been terrible. 3 human ships had fought against a much larger Vraxian fleet, and they had fought so well that it scared everyone who watched. The humans used tactics that no one had seen before and weapons that seemed to appear from nowhere. They made the Vraxian admirals look like beginners, even though the Vraxians had been fighting wars in space for thousands of years. Zekthor remembered his lessons from the military academy. The instructors had shown videos of that battle, and they had made every student watch carefully. The human ships moved in ways that seemed random but were actually perfectly coordinated. They used the environment around them as weapons. They adapted to every change in tactics within minutes. By the time the Galactic Council stepped in and forced both sides to stop fighting, the Vraxians had lost 12 ships, and the humans had lost only 1. The quarantine had been decided immediately after that. The Council said it was for everyone's safety, including the humans. They said humanity needed time to mature before they could join the galactic community. But everyone knew the real reason. The Council was afraid. They were afraid of what humans might do if they were allowed to spread across the stars. Now one of those human ships was here, and Zekthor had no idea how they had escaped. The containment field was supposed to detect any attempt to leave the Sol system. It was supposed to send alerts to every Council military installation within range. But no alerts had been sent. The field was still active according to all the sensors. There were no breaches and no signs of damage. The human ship had somehow gotten out without breaking through. Zekthor sent an emergency message to Fleet Command and waited for instructions. While he waited, he studied the human vessel more carefully. The ship was big, but not as big as a Vraxian battle cruiser. Its energy signature was strange, and his sensors could not identify what kind of power source it used. The hull was made from materials that were not in any database. Everything about the ship was unknown, and that made it dangerous. On board the Dakota, Captain Jacob Hayes sat in his command chair and read through his orders one more time. He knew every word by memory, but reading them again helped him stay focused. His executive officer, Lisa Grant, was checking systems with her usual efficiency. She was good at her job, and Jacob trusted her completely. Lisa reported that all stations were ready, and the ship was holding its assigned position. Jacob nodded and felt the tension in his shoulders. This mission was classified at levels that most people did not even know existed. Only a handful of people in Earth's government knew what the Dakota was doing out here. 2 years ago, human scientists had discovered something remarkable. The quarantine field that trapped humanity in the Sol system was not as perfect as everyone thought. There were natural tunnels in space-time that formed at certain locations and certain times. These quantum corridors could be used to slip past the containment field without triggering any alarms. The first probes had tested this theory, and they had been successful. Then small ships had tried it, and they had also succeeded. The decision to send the Dakota had caused arguments among Earth's military leaders. Admiral Patricia Stone had insisted that humanity needed to make a statement. She said the time for hiding was over. The Dakota was Earth's most advanced battleship, and it carried technology that had been developed during the long centuries of isolation. If humanity was going to announce its presence to the galaxy, it should do so with strength. Jacob had been chosen to command this mission because of his experience. He had been a young officer during the First Contact War. He had served on the USS Marathon when it encountered the Vraxian fleet. He had watched from the tactical station as his ship and two others fought against impossible odds. He remembered the contempt in the Vraxian transmissions and the dismissive way they had treated humanity. The Council had not quarantined Earth because they thought humans would conquer the galaxy. They had done it because humanity's very existence challenged the way galactic civilization worked. Lieutenant Claire Brooks called out from the tactical station. Multiple vessels were being detected in the surrounding sectors. None were close enough to be dangerous yet, but they were definitely paying attention to the Dakota. Jacob told her to let them look. He was not here to hide. Far across the expanse, Admiral Theron of the Talar Confederacy received the emergency transmission and felt cold fear spread through his body. A human battleship was operating freely in space. His communications officer had burst into his office without following any protocol because the news was too important to wait. Theron read the data and felt his scales tighten against his skin. He asked if the council had been notified and was told that an emergency session had been called. Every council member would meet within the hour. Theron stood up and ordered his shuttle prepared. He also wanted every piece of intelligence about human military capabilities pulled from the archives. His officer reminded him that most of that data was 600 years old, but Theron did not care. Old data was better than no data. As he looked out at his fleet, Theron thought about what this meant. One human ship had escaped the quarantine. The question that terrified him was simple and horrible. If one ship had gotten out, how many others were already in space that no one had detected yet? Back on the Dakota, Jacob stood and stretched his muscles. They had been holding position for 6 hours exactly as ordered. The mission was clear: establish a presence and make no aggressive moves, but respond with full force to any threats. Lieutenant Dan Morris announced that they were being hailed on multiple frequencies. Vraxian and Talar and several other species were trying to make contact. Jacob told him to ignore all of them for now. They would only transmit when Admiral Stone gave the word. Lisa moved closer and asked quietly if he thought they would be attacked. Jacob considered the question carefully. The political situation in this region was complicated. The Vraxians and Talars had been fighting a cold war for many years. The presence of a human ship might make both sides too nervous to act. Neither side would want to start a fight while the other was watching. In the Galactic Council chambers, representatives from 47 species gathered for an emergency session. The room was filled with noise as everyone talked over each other with accusations and demands. Chancellor Mevris tried to bring order, but it was difficult. The matter they faced was completely unprecedented. A human vessel was operating beyond the quarantine zone, and they had to decide what to do about it. Ambassador Crix of the Vraxian Dominion demanded immediate military action. The quarantine existed to protect all species, and this violation could not be tolerated. Ambassador Celine of the Talar Confederacy suggested they should first understand how the escape was possible. If the containment field had failed, that was a threat regardless of human involvement. Dr. Norvin, the Council's chief science advisor, spoke quietly, and everyone turned to listen. He said that the containment field had not failed. He had reviewed all the data, and the field was working exactly as designed. The human vessel had not broken through it. The question of how they had escaped was what worried him most. Either humans had found a natural phenomenon that the Council did not know about, or they had developed technology that could not be detected. Both possibilities suggested that humanity had not been idle during 600 years of isolation. The chamber exploded into arguments again as species blamed each other and proposed different solutions. No one could agree on what should be done. Some wanted war and others wanted negotiation, and many just wanted the problem to disappear. But the problem was not going to disappear. Humanity was out in the galaxy now, and the old rules no longer applied. The emergency session continued for 8 more hours without reaching any agreement. Ambassador Crix kept proposing military responses, and each one was more aggressive than the last. Ambassador Celine kept arguing for caution, but everyone knew she was more interested in blocking Vraxian power than actually helping the situation. Chancellor Mevris was exhausted from trying to keep order, as delegates shouted at each other about what should be done. When Mevris finally called for a break, most of the ambassadors left quickly, but Ambassador Kira of the Solaran Collective stayed behind. The Solarans were one of the few species that had remained neutral during the First Human War. They had not taken sides, and they had not supported the quarantine. Kira's skin glowed with colors that showed concern, and Mevris had learned to read those colors over many years of working together. Kira told Mevris that she had been reviewing old records, and something troubled her. During the First Contact War, human vessels had shown capabilities that should not have been possible for such a young species. They used tactics that were completely new and weapons that no one could counter. The Council had assumed these were desperate innovations created under pressure, but Kira thought they might have been wrong. What if humans simply developed technology differently than other species? What if their entire approach to progress followed a pattern that the galaxy had never seen before? Mevris felt his spine stiffen as he understood what Kira was suggesting. Humanity had been isolated for 600 years with no outside contact and no way to know what was happening in the rest of the galaxy. They had been left alone to develop and innovate without any external pressure or guidance. No one knew what they were capable of now. No one knew how many ships they had or where those ships might be. The only thing anyone knew for certain was that they had found a way past a barrier that was supposed to be perfect, and they had done it without triggering any alarms. On the Dakota, Captain Jacob Hayes was reading intelligence reports when Lisa Grant entered with a worried expression. Communications traffic had increased dramatically across all monitored channels. The Galactic Council appeared to be in complete crisis mode. Multiple fleets were moving, and the Vraxians were repositioning 3 battle groups. The Talars were matching those movements exactly. Both sides were preparing for something big. Jacob leaned back and thought about what this meant. The two powers were preparing for war, but the question was whether they would fight each other or fight the Dakota. Lisa asked if it mattered, and Jacob said it mattered very much. If they united against humanity, then the Dakota would have to retreat according to orders. But if they stayed divided over how to respond, then the mission would be a complete success. Lisa asked permission to speak freely, and Jacob always encouraged that. She said the whole mission felt like provocation. They were one ship sitting deep in foreign space with no support within weeks of travel time. If things went wrong, they would not be getting out alive. Jacob understood her concern, but he explained why Admiral Stone had chosen him for this command. He told Lisa that he had been there during the First Contact War. He was a junior officer on the Marathon when they met the Vraxian forward fleet. He watched that battle from his station, and he saw what happened when humanity tried to communicate peacefully and was met with immediate aggression. The official record said the Vraxians fired first, and that was true, but what the records did not show was the contempt in their voices. The Vraxians had dismissed humanity as nothing worth considering. The Council had not quarantined Earth because they feared conquest. They did it because humanity challenged the entire foundation of how galactic civilization worked. Their conversation was interrupted by Claire Brooks calling from the bridge. Incoming vessels were approaching, and Jacob needed to see this immediately. Jacob and Lisa rushed to the bridge and arrived within seconds. The view screen showed 3 ships coming from different directions. Claire had their information displayed on multiple screens: 1 Vraxian heavy cruiser and 1 Taylor destroyer, and 1 ship she was still trying to identify. The 3rd ship turned out to be a Solaran diplomatic vessel, and it was completely unarmed. Lisa looked surprised because the Solarans had stayed neutral during the First War. Jacob remembered that fact well. Dan Morris reported that the ships had not tried to communicate yet. They were just matching the Dakota's position and holding at 10,000 kilometers distance. Jacob understood what was happening. The other ships were waiting to see what the Dakota would do. He made a quick decision and ordered Dan to open a channel on all frequencies. When the channel was ready, Jacob straightened his uniform and looked at the view screen, knowing that his image was being sent to all 3 vessels. He introduced himself as captain of the Dakota and said they came in peace and operated within their rights as a sovereign species. He said they were willing to talk with any representatives who had authority to speak for their governments. Silence followed for several long moments. Then the Solaran vessel responded. Ambassador Kira introduced herself and said she was authorized by the Council to begin preliminary discussions. However, she had to inform Jacob that his presence violated the Sol Quarantine Act according to galactic law. Jacob smiled slightly and said that humanity had never agreed to galactic law. They were placed under quarantine without any representation or negotiation or due process. Earth's government recognized no authority over human vessels operating in neutral space. Another voice broke into the channel, and it was harsh and angry. Commander Zekthor of the Vraxian Dominion said the Dakota was in violation of established boundaries. He ordered Jacob to power down weapons and prepare to be boarded for inspection. Before Jacob could answer, a third voice joined the conversation. Captain Valen of the Talar Confederacy said that this region was not under Vraxian control. He supported Ambassador Kira's suggestion for dialogue instead of confrontation. Jacob told his crew that the political divisions in the galaxy were showing immediately. He addressed all 3 ships and thanked them for their different perspectives. But he needed to be very clear about something. The Dakota would not be boarded or inspected or subjected to any authority that Earth did not recognize. Humanity had emerged from isolation and expected to be treated as equals in all future interactions. Zekthor's voice came back full of contempt. He said Jacob spoke of equality from a position of weakness. The Dakota was just 1 vessel. The combined fleets of the Council numbered in the thousands. Jacob was claiming equality when he had no power to back up his words. Jacob felt everyone on the bridge watching him and waiting to see what he would say next. Jacob spoke carefully and chose his words with precision. 600 years ago, Vraxian forces encountered 3 human vessels in the outer reaches. The Vraxians started the fight with overwhelming numbers and superior technology. They were confident of quick victory. But those 3 human ships fought the Vraxian fleet to a complete standstill for 11 hours before help arrived. They used tactics the Vraxians had never seen and weapons they could not counter. They forced the Vraxian admirals to completely change their assessment of human capabilities. Jacob let that sink in before continuing. Now Zekthor faced 1 human ship, and he had no idea what the Dakota was capable of. He had no information about human technology or tactics or fleet strength. When he looked at the Dakota, he should ask himself a simple question. If this 1 ship was here alone, what did that say about human confidence? The channel went silent, and Jacob could feel the tension. Ambassador Kira spoke again with careful neutrality in her voice. She said Jacob made a good argument and perhaps they should continue discussions in a more formal setting. She proposed a meeting at a neutral location. Jacob said he would consider that, but first he needed assurances that no hostile actions would be taken against the Dakota while negotiations were arranged. Zekthor objected strongly. He said asking them to stand down while the Dakota maintained its position was unacceptable. Jacob replied calmly that they seemed to be at an impasse. Captain Valen suggested a compromise. All vessels would maintain current positions and weapons status. No aggressive actions by anyone until the Council could deliberate. This would serve everyone's interests. Jacob thought about the proposal. It was reasonable and it bought time for information to reach Earth. He agreed that the Dakota would hold position and maintain defensive posture only. Zekthor said the Vraxian Dominion did not agree. The human vessel represented a clear danger. Ambassador Kira responded quietly. Perhaps the Vraxians should explain to the Council why they were so eager to start hostilities with a species whose capabilities were unknown. Some might wonder if this eagerness came from fear rather than strength. Jacob could sense Zekthor's rage even through the communication system, but the Vraxian commander said nothing more. It seemed they had reached a temporary arrangement. Jacob told Ambassador Kira to inform the Council that Earth looked forward to formal discussions about humanity's place in the galactic community. When the channel closed, Lisa let out a long breath. She said that had been a dangerous gamble. Jacob agreed that the whole mission was a gamble, but now the aliens were uncertain, and uncertainty made people cautious. He ordered Claire to run full tactical analysis on all 3 vessels. He wanted to know everything about their movements and their energy signatures and anything unusual. Jacob sat in his command chair, knowing that the easy part was finished. Now they had to wait, and in space waiting was often the most dangerous time. The other ships held their positions and watched the Dakota. The Dakota watched them back. Somewhere far away, the Galactic Council was arguing about what to do. On Earth, Admiral Stone was preparing the next phase of her plan. And throughout the sector, more and more ships were arriving as word spread that a human vessel was operating freely beyond the quarantine. Jacob looked at his crew and saw confidence on their faces. They had trained for this mission. They knew the risks, and they had accepted them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The Dakota had made its statement. Humanity was here, and humanity was not leaving. The galaxy would have to adapt to that new reality, whether they liked it or not. Admiral Patricia Stone stood deep underground in the war room beneath Terran Space Command headquarters. She watched the holographic display showing the Dakota's position with complete focus. Around her, the Joint Chiefs of Earth's military branches monitored data streams and tactical information from across the sector. Everyone was tense because the situation was developing faster than anticipated. General Marcus Cole reported that the Varaxians were moving more ships into the region. 4 additional battle groups had repositioned in the last 6 hours. They were clearly preparing for a major operation. Admiral Frank Liu added that the Talars were matching those movements exactly. Neither side wanted to give the other any advantage. Patricia allowed herself a small smile. This was exactly what they had predicted. The Dakota's presence was forcing the 2 powers to focus on each other as much as on the human ship. Director Helen Park of Terran Intelligence was not satisfied with just strategic success. She warned that several minor council species were calling for unified action against what they termed the human threat. If the major powers managed to unite against Earth, then all the careful positioning would mean nothing. Patricia asked how long until the Columbus reached its assigned position. Helen checked her datapad and reported that Captain Ryan Murphy would arrive at his coordinates in 14 hours. The Philadelphia under Captain Amy Carter was 18 hours away from her position. Patricia asked if both ships were maintaining complete stealth, and Helen confirmed they were in full radio silence. If the new stealth technology worked as designed, no one would detect them until Earth wanted them to be found. General Cole expressed concern about putting so much trust in untested systems. Patricia turned to face him directly. She reminded everyone that everything they were doing was untested. That was the nature of emerging from 6 centuries of isolation. But they had advantages that no one else understood. The galaxy had been politically stable for hundreds of years. The same powers controlled the same regions, and their military thinking was conservative. Their technology improved slowly through small, incremental changes. Meanwhile, humanity had been innovating in isolation and solving problems that aliens did not even know existed. Helen asked what would happen if they were wrong about everything. Patricia's voice became hard. Then Captain Hayes and his crew would die as martyrs, and Earth would prepare for a war they probably could not win. But she did not believe they were wrong. Every simulation and every analysis suggested the same conclusion. The galaxy was not prepared for what humanity had become. On the Dakota, Jacob was reading crew reports when Claire Brooks called him to the bridge with urgency. He arrived quickly and found the tactical station showing dozens of new contacts. Claire was working her controls rapidly, trying to identify everything she was seeing. She counted at least 40 new vessels within sensor range, and that was only what they could detect at current settings. Jacob asked for classifications, and Claire reported a mixed force: Vraxian and Talar and Corthan and Selenite, and at least 6 other species she was still identifying. This looked like a major fleet concentration unlike anything seen in this sector for many years. Lisa suggested this might be preparation for a coordinated attack. Jacob considered another possibility. It could be a show of force designed to intimidate the Dakota into withdrawing. Dan Morris reported no new communications directed at them, but lots of encrypted traffic between the various fleets. They were definitely coordinating something. Jacob made a quick decision. He ordered Dan to establish a secure channel to Admiral Stone using maximum encryption. The transmission would take time to travel the distance, but security was more important than speed. When the channel was ready, Jacob recorded a detailed situation report. He described everything that had happened in the last 12 hours and provided his tactical assessment. His recommendation was to hold position, but prepare for rapid withdrawal if necessary. They had made their point. Staying longer increased risk without gaining much additional benefit. He sent the message and waited for a response. The reply took several minutes because of the distance involved. When Admiral Stone's face appeared on his private screen, her expression showed complete determination. She said negative to his withdrawal recommendation. He was to maintain position until further orders. The Columbus and Philadelphia would join him within 24 hours. Once all 3 vessels were in position, they would proceed to Phase 2. She also warned that he might see unusual sensor readings soon and told him not to be alarmed. Jacob stared at the blank screen after the message ended. 3 ships against what was becoming an armada. He trusted Stone's judgment completely, but this was starting to feel extremely dangerous. The odds were getting worse with every hour that passed. More alien ships kept arriving, and the Dakota sat at the center of all that hostile attention with no support anywhere close. Back in the council chambers, the emergency session had started again with even more tension than before. Chancellor Mevris struggled to keep order as ambassadors shouted over each other about what should be done. Ambassador Crix declared that the human vessel had been in the Kelros expanse for over a standard day now. Every moment of delay sent a message of weakness to everyone watching these events. Ambassador Celine countered that rushing toward military action risked starting a war with an opponent they did not understand. The Vraxian Dominion's aggressive stance was obviously motivated by politics. They saw this as an opportunity to demonstrate military dominance over everyone else. Crix shot back that the Talar Confederacy's reluctance was equally transparent. They hoped to use this crisis to undermine Vraxian influence in the region. Mevris shouted for silence. He reminded everyone they were not here to pursue narrow political interests. They faced a genuine threat to galactic order. Ambassador Kira stood and her colors showed disagreement. She questioned whether they truly faced any threat at all. One human vessel operating peacefully in neutral space represented no immediate danger. What they were really debating was whether they had the right to dictate where humanity could travel. Ambassador Drex of the Corthan Alliance insisted the quarantine was legally established. The humans had violated that legal framework. Kira replied that it was a legal framework humanity never agreed to. The Council had imposed isolation on an entire species without their consent or participation. By what moral authority did they claim that right? Crix answered that authority came from superior force and collective security. Humanity had demonstrated dangerous capabilities during first contact. The quarantine protected everyone, including the humans themselves. Kira's colors flickered with anger. She said they had imprisoned an entire species for 600 years. They denied humans the right to explore and grow and interact with the wider galaxy. They did it because humans frightened them. The chamber descended into chaos as several ambassadors demanded that Kira be censured for her remarks. Others rose to support her position. The council was breaking apart along political and philosophical lines. Chancellor Mevris could see his authority crumbling as species chose sides based on their own interests rather than any collective good. Dr. Norvin raised a tentacle and asked for attention. When the noise finally decreased, he spoke in his careful, measured way. Perhaps they were asking the wrong questions entirely. They were debating legality and morality while ignoring practical reality. The humans were out. They had found a way past the containment, which meant the containment was never truly absolute. Everyone could either adapt to this new reality or waste energy trying to restore a status quo that might be impossible to recover. Ambassador Drex asked if Norvin was suggesting they simply accept this violation. Norvin replied that he was suggesting they focus on understanding human intentions and capabilities before making decisions that could lead to disaster. He displayed data showing analysis of the Dakota. Its energy signature was unlike anything in Council databases. Its hull was made from materials no one could identify. Its propulsion operated on principles that sensors could not fully characterize. The chamber became very quiet as everyone absorbed what this meant. Norvin continued his explanation. This single vessel represented more unknown variables than any first contact in Council history. They were operating with almost no real information about what they faced. He strongly recommended diplomatic engagement rather than military action until they had better understanding of the situation. Ambassador Crix was not convinced. He said Norvin's caution was noted, but the Vraxian Dominion had mobilized sufficient forces to handle any threat. If the Council lacked resolve to act, then the Dominion would proceed independently. Chancellor Mevris warned that would violate Council protocols. Crix asked if Mevris had the votes to prohibit independent action. Mevris looked around the chamber and saw the political reality. Several species would support the Vraxians. Others would oppose them. Many would abstain to avoid choosing sides. There was no consensus and no way to enforce any decision. He announced that the Council would vote on a resolution within 6 hours. Until that vote concluded, all members were bound by existing protocols. Any independent military action would be considered a serious breach. Crix bowed his head, but everyone knew it meant nothing. The Vraxians would do whatever they wanted regardless of any vote. As the session ended, Ambassador Kira caught up with Dr. Norvin in the corridor outside. She thanked him for his intervention, but feared it had only bought a little time. Norvin agreed that time was all anyone could hope for now. Time for cooler thinking to prevail and for more information to emerge. Norvin admitted he was not optimistic about the outcome. The Vraxians saw this as an opportunity to reassert dominance. The Talars would not allow the Vraxians to act without response. Humanity was the unknown factor in an equation everyone was trying to solve. Kira asked what he thought humans wanted. Norvin said that was what frightened him most. He did not think they wanted anything the Council was prepared to offer. They simply wanted recognition of their right to exist among the stars without anyone's permission. That challenged the entire foundation of how galactic civilization had been organized for thousands of years. Kira's colors shifted to deep purple, showing profound concern. She said they might be heading toward conflict, regardless of anyone's intentions. Norvin agreed grimly. The pieces were all in motion now, and stopping them might be impossible. Captain Ryan Murphy of the USS Columbus watched his stealth systems with complete satisfaction. Every indicator showed green status. His ship was invisible to conventional sensors as it drifted through space on minimal power. Dozens of alien warships passed within a few 100,000 kilometers, completely unaware that a human battleship was watching their every movement. His executive officer, Kate Morgan, spoke in a whisper as if talking too loudly might somehow break their concealment. She said the technology was remarkable. They were close enough to count windows on that Vraxian battlecruiser, and the aliens had absolutely no idea the Columbus was there. Ryan nodded in agreement. The stealth drive used quantum field manipulation that was one of humanity's greatest breakthroughs during isolation. By creating a localized distortion in space-time, they could bend sensor waves around their hull while maintaining propulsion. It consumed enormous energy and limited their speed, but for infiltration it was perfect. Ryan asked how long until they reached their assigned position. Lieutenant Ben Foster reported 4 hours at current speed. Ryan ordered continued silent running with all protocols in effect. If even one alien ship detected them before the right moment, the entire operation would collapse. On the USS Philadelphia, Captain Amy Carter faced a different problem. Her ship had encountered an unexpected debris field, probably from some ancient battle. Navigating through it while maintaining stealth was proving difficult. She told her navigation officer, Julie Adams, that she needed more precision in the calculations. They could not afford to hit anything at this speed. Even a small collision might compromise the stealth field. Julie's fingers moved rapidly across her console. She reported that a clear path would open in 30 seconds. If they adjusted course by 3 degrees and increased speed by 2%, they would slide through perfectly. Amy trusted her crew's abilities completely. She gave the order, and the Philadelphia glided through the debris field like a needle through fabric. They emerged on the other side without any problems. Amy checked their position relative to the Dakota and confirmed they were exactly on schedule. Back on the Dakota, Jacob was growing more concerned about the number of vessels gathering nearby. The tactical display looked like a complex three-dimensional puzzle with pieces from multiple players all moving toward the same location. Claire Brooks reported the latest count was 73 vessels, not including smaller escort ships. This was the largest fleet concentration in this sector in over a century. Lisa observed that the ships were not all on the same side either. The Vraxians had about 30 ships, and the Talars had 25. The remaining 18 belonged to various council species. If fighting started, it would be complete chaos with everyone shooting at everyone else. Jacob was considering this situation when Dan Morris practically jumped from his station with excitement. They were being hailed on a priority diplomatic channel from Ambassador Kira. Jacob ordered the transmission on the main screen. Kira's face appeared with her colors swirling in urgent patterns. She said she was reaching out on an unsecured channel deliberately. What she was about to say needed to be heard by everyone monitoring the conversation. Jacob exchanged quick glances with Lisa, but nodded for Kira to continue. Kira reported that the council vote had concluded 20 minutes earlier. The result was inconclusive, with no clear majority for any action. However, Ambassador Crix had informed the council that the Vraxian Dominion would take independent action to neutralize the human threat. Their fleet was preparing to move on the Dakota's position within 2 hours. Jacob felt tension through his entire body. He asked what the council's response was to this declaration. Kira said the council was divided, with some species supporting Vraxian action and others condemning it. The Taylor Confederacy stated they would defend neutral space from Vraxian aggression, though their true motive was preventing Vraxian expansion. Kira said Jacob was about to become the center of a conflict that went far beyond his presence. She was giving him this warning because he deserved the chance to withdraw while possible. Jacob said he appreciated the warning, but the Dakota was not leaving. Kira's colors flickered with surprise. She reminded him that he faced 15 Vraxian warships, including 3 battlecruisers. Even if the Talars intervened, he would be caught in crossfire. This was suicide. Jacob smiled slightly and said he wanted to share something that might give everyone pause. They were not one ship. Kira looked confused, and Jacob ordered Dan to broadcast on all frequencies with maximum signal strength. Dan confirmed that every vessel within 2 light hours would receive the transmission. Jacob stood and straightened his uniform. He addressed all ships in the Kelros expanse. For the past day, they had been observing one human vessel and drawing conclusions based on incomplete information. That assessment was wrong. He nodded to Claire, who activated a subroutine in the Dakota's systems. Suddenly, 2 new contacts appeared on every tactical display in the region, materializing as if from nowhere. The Columbus and Philadelphia dropped their stealth fields simultaneously. Their positions put them in perfect flanking formation relative to the Vraxian fleet. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Chaos erupted across multiple channels as ships found undetected contacts appearing at critical locations. Ryan Murphy's voice came through, clearly identifying himself as captain of the Columbus, with all systems ready. Amy Carter followed, announcing the Philadelphia was standing by. Jacob continued his broadcast. 3 human vessels operating with stealth technology that apparently could not be detected. They had been observing alien movements and tactics and communications for days. They had mapped fleet positions and identified command vessels. All of this accomplished while everyone believed they were tracking one isolated ship. He paused to let the implications sink in. Then he asked everyone listening to consider a simple question. If they could deploy 3 ships without detection, how many more might be out there still hidden? There was no way to know because sensors clearly could not find them when they chose to remain concealed. Ambassador Kira was still on the view screen, and her colors had turned brilliant orange, indicating shock. She said Jacob had just changed the entire strategic situation. Jacob agreed that was the intention. He turned his attention to the wider broadcast. To the Vraxian Dominion, he said they were preparing to attack what they believed was a vulnerable target. He suggested reconsidering that assessment. To the Talar Confederacy, he thanked them for their protection, but said it was unnecessary. To all Council species, he stated that humanity had emerged with capabilities they did not understand and could not counter with current technology. Commander Zekthor's voice crackled with much less confidence than before. He claimed this was a trick or sensor manipulation. Jacob replied calmly that Zekthor was welcome to test that theory. The Columbus and Philadelphia would happily provide targeting data to prove they were real. Of course, that would be a hostile act, and everyone had seen enough surprises for one day. The channels filled with frantic chatter. Fleet commanders demanded updates. Ambassadors requested emergency consultations. Scientists tried to understand how they had missed 2 capital ships. Admiral Stone's voice cut through the noise with her transmission from Earth arriving at perfect timing. She identified herself as commander of Terran Space Command and addressed all vessels and representatives. Stone stated Earth's terms clearly. First, humanity claimed the right to free passage through all neutral and unclaimed space. Second, they sought formal diplomatic relations with all species willing to engage as equals. Third, any attack on human vessels would be considered an act of war. Fourth, they had no territorial ambitions beyond their home system and selected research outposts. She paused and then stated these terms were not negotiable. Earth was not asking permission to exist among the stars. They were informing everyone of reality. The quarantine era was finished. How they proceeded depended on whether the galaxy would adapt peacefully or force humanity to defend their rights. In the council chambers, Chancellor Mevris looked at assembled ambassadors with most appearing shocked. Ambassador Crix had gone completely silent. His aggressive posturing suddenly seemed foolish and dangerous. Dr. Norvin spoke into the silence, suggesting this would be an appropriate time to recommend negotiations rather than military action. Nobody disagreed with him. Ambassador Kira, still on the open channel with the Dakota, addressed Jacob directly. She said that on behalf of the Solaran Collective and with emergency authority, She proposed an immediate ceasefire and establishment of a diplomatic conference. Would Earth accept? Jacob looked around his bridge. His crew had performed perfectly. The mission had succeeded beyond expectations. Now came the truly difficult work of transforming military advantage into lasting recognition. Jacob said that Earth accepted the proposal. They would send representatives to negotiate formal status within the galactic community. However, their 3 vessels would remain at current positions, maintaining full readiness until negotiations concluded satisfactorily. Kira said she understood and would immediately coordinate with council leadership to establish conference parameters. As the channel closed, Lisa let out a long breath. She said they had actually accomplished it. Jacob corrected her. Phase 1 was complete, but the hard part was just beginning. Turning military surprise into political legitimacy would require careful work. He ordered all stations to remain at battle readiness. Someone would likely try something foolish before this finished. Claire reported that the Vraxian fleet was powering down weapons and breaking formation. Jacob said that was a smart decision, though he imagined Zekthor was having an unpleasant conversation with his superiors. On the view screen, the mass of alien warships began dispersing as immediate threat evaporated, but Jacob knew this was only the beginning. The real battle for humanity's place among the stars was just starting, and it would be fought with words and agreements rather than weapons. 3 weeks passed since the standoff in the Kelros expanse, and the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The abandoned space station selected for diplomatic talks had been quickly refurbished by a joint task force. The ancient facility orbited a dim red dwarf star in a system so unremarkable that no species had ever claimed it. This made it perfect neutral territory for the most important negotiations in galactic history. Jacob stood on the Dakota's observation deck, watching ships from 40 different species docked at the station. The past weeks had been filled with preliminary talks and technical demonstrations, and the slow, careful work of building trust with civilizations that had feared humanity for 6 centuries. He had been called to dozens of meetings to explain human tactics and capabilities to skeptical alien commanders who could not believe what they had witnessed. Dan Morris informed him through the comm that lead negotiators were ready. Jacob made his way through the station's corridors, still finding the architecture strange, despite spending weeks aboard. The design reflected species with different physical needs than humans. Gravity changed between sections, and atmosphere varied to accommodate different respiratory requirements. The main conference chamber had been adapted with zones for each species. Jacob entered the human section to find Admiral Stone already present, along with Ambassador Nicholas Shaw, who served as Earth's chief diplomat. Dr. Linda Martinez was also there as humanity's expert on alien biology and culture. Nicholas greeted Jacob warmly and thanked him for joining them. He said Jacob's perspective as someone who faced galactic judgment directly would be valuable today. Chancellor Mevris called the session to order as delegations settled into their zones. He announced they were here to finalize humanity's formal recognition within the galactic community. Preliminary agreements had been distributed to all parties. Today, they would address remaining contentious issues. The chamber held tension that everyone could feel. Ambassador Theron spoke for the Vraxian Dominion since the aggressive Krix had been recalled. Theron was more diplomatic but still represented a species that had wanted to attack the Dakota. He said the Vraxians had reviewed human proposals extensively. While they had concerns, they acknowledged that isolation was no longer sustainable. However, they proposed that recognition include strict limits on human military expansion with mandatory transparency about fleet movements. Before Nicholas could respond, Ambassador Celine of the Talar Confederacy spoke up. She said Vraxian concerns about military transparency seemed hollow, considering they maintained the largest fleet in the galaxy and consistently refused detailed information about their own capabilities. If restrictions were applied to humanity, they should apply equally to everyone. Theron responded that the Talars would love to see Vraxian power constrained. Selene replied smoothly that the Vraxians would love to expand their influence without oversight. Jacob watched this exchange with interest. The political dynamics were becoming very clear. The Vraxians and Talars had been fighting a cold war for decades, and humanity's emergence disrupted their careful balance. Ambassador Kira raised a glowing tentacle for attention. Her colors showed thoughtful consideration as she addressed the chamber. Perhaps they were approaching everything incorrectly. Rather than imposing restrictions on humanity, they should establish universal principles applying to all species. Transparency in military movements through neutral space, and protocols for contact with isolated species and mechanisms for resolving disputes. Make these standards universal, and humanity would simply be one more species bound by the same rules. Nicholas leaned forward with interest. He said Earth would support such a framework provided rules were truly universal and enforced equally. They would not accept second-class status disguised as neutral regulation. Dr. Norvin, attending as technical advisor, projected a holographic analysis. He asked permission to share comparative data, and Mevris agreed. The chart filled the chamber's center, showing fleet sizes and technological capabilities and economic capacity for all major species. Humanity's capabilities were listed as largely unknown, with specific confirmed abilities highlighted. Norvin explained that human stealth technology represented significant advantages in reconnaissance and possibly strikes. However, their total fleet appeared substantially smaller than any major power. They had quality and innovation, but not quantity. Admiral Stone noted dryly that this assessment assumed Earth had revealed all their ships. Norvin acknowledged that point, which brought him to his main argument. They were negotiating with imperfect information. Humanity knew much about the galaxy from centuries of observation. The galaxy knew very little about humanity. This imbalance created natural suspicion and fear. Nicholas asked if Norvin was suggesting they reveal everything. Norvin proposed a phased transparency approach. Humanity would provide detailed information about current fleet strength and technology. In exchange, the Council would give humanity full access to galactic charts and diplomatic records and technological databases. Both sides would gain knowledge and reduce uncertainty. Jacob watched Nicholas consider this carefully. It was actually clever. Humanity's real advantage was not fleet size, but the innovation behind it. Revealing the Dakota and Columbus and Philadelphia would not compromise security, especially since next-generation designs were already being developed. Nicholas said slowly that Earth would participate in such an exchange, provided it was genuinely reciprocal and included all Council species. Theron looked uncomfortable, probably because Vraxians maintained classified programs they wanted hidden. But opposing transparency while demanding it from humanity would look hypocritical. He said the Dominion could support limited information exchange with certain security-sensitive details naturally excluded. Selene quickly added that this must apply for all species. If Vraxians maintained secrets, then humanity could too. The discussions continued for hours with careful negotiation over every detail. Each species tried protecting interests while working toward agreement that would reshape galactic politics. Jacob was called on several times to provide tactical perspective. His first-hand experience with human and alien operations made him valuable for evaluating proposals. During a break, Ambassador Kira approached Jacob in a communal area. Her colors shifted in patterns that software interpreted as friendly curiosity. She asked to speak informally, and Jacob agreed. Kira said she had been studying human history during negotiations. Humanity showed fascinating patterns of intense conflict, followed by remarkable cooperation. Multiple governments competing, then unifying. Constant innovation driven by competition and necessity. Jacob asked if that was a compliment or warning. Kira said perhaps both. The galaxy had been stable for a very long time. Stable, but also stagnant. The same powers dominated the same regions with political patterns repeating endlessly. Humanity's arrival disrupted stability, but might also catalyze necessary change. Many species feared that because change was frightening when you had grown comfortable. Jacob asked about the Solarans and their position. Kira's colors brightened as she said they embraced change. The Solaran Collective would formally recognize Earth's sovereignty and right to free passage regardless of broader council decisions. They would establish full diplomatic relations and propose mutual defense and trade agreements. Jacob felt satisfaction at securing the first true ally. Earth would welcome those discussions. Negotiations continued another week with a framework slowly emerging. Humanity would be recognized as sovereign with all rights given to council species. In exchange, Earth would participate in mutual defense and information sharing, with understanding that all major species face the same obligations. The quarantine was formally ended and acknowledged as an emergency measure that had extended too far beyond its intention. Jacob was present when final votes occurred. One by one, species indicated their positions. The Solaran Collective voted for recognition immediately. The Talar Confederacy followed. Minor species split various ways. The Vraxian Dominion, in a surprise move, also voted for recognition, probably calculating that acceptance was better than continued chaos. When the final count finished, 41 species voted for recognition, with 4 against and 2 abstaining. Chancellor Mevris brought his ceremonial hammer down with a resonant sound. He stated for the record that the Galactic Council formally recognized the Terran Unified Government as a sovereign interstellar entity, with all rights and responsibilities. The Sol Quarantine Act was repealed. Humanity was welcomed into the community of spacefaring civilizations. The chamber erupted with mixed reactions depending on species. Ambassador Nicholas stood with carefully neutral expression despite the momentous occasion. He said that on behalf of Earth, they accepted recognition and pledged to work cooperatively toward mutual prosperity and peace. He added with deliberate emphasis that recognition came not as a gift from powerful species, but as acknowledgement of humanity's inherent rights. They thanked supporters and extended open hands to those with reservations. The future was unwritten, and they would write it together. As the session ended, Jacob found himself surrounded by celebrating officers and diplomats. But his mind was already considering what came next. Getting recognition was not the hard part. Maintaining it and building genuine relationships with species that feared humanity and navigating complex galactic politics would be the real challenge. Admiral Stone appeared beside him and commented that he looked thoughtful. Jacob said he was considering next steps. They had opened the door but still needed to walk through it. Stone smiled and said that was wise perspective. She offered him a new assignment. Earth was establishing a proper embassy at the station. She needed someone with tactical experience and diplomatic exposure and crew respect to serve as military attaché. Jacob considered returning to Earth and regular duties versus staying at the center of humanity's galactic engagement. The choice was obvious. He accepted immediately. Stone said his first assignment was already waiting. The Solaran Collective had invited a delegation to their home system for formal treaty negotiations. He would accompany Nicholas as military advisor. They would leave in 3 days. Jacob moved to the observation window as celebration continued around him. Outside ships from dozens of species moved around the station, representing the galactic community that humanity now officially joined. The Columbus and Philadelphia remained docked nearby, with their sleek hulls reminding everyone of human capabilities. More ships would come soon as Earth established permanent presence across the galaxy. Lisa Grant joined him, having been promoted to captain and taking command of the Dakota. She observed that 3 weeks ago they were ready to fight their way out. Jacob replied they had won through presence and demonstrating capability without using it. That would be the challenge going forward. maintaining respect without becoming what others feared. Lisa said those were heavy thoughts for a celebration. Jacob agreed, but said they were realistic. Today they celebrated, but tomorrow work continued. Across the station, similar conversations happened in different languages and different contexts. Species that viewed humanity as threats were cautiously reconsidering. Others that supported recognition planned how to capitalize on opportunities. Some isolationists already plotted to undermine the new order. Ambassador Kira stood in her quarters composing a message for the Solaran homeworld. She wrote that humans had arrived and the galaxy would never be the same. They brought chaos and uncertainty, but also vitality and possibility. They challenged assumptions and forced reconsideration of comfortable truths. This might be the best thing to happen to stagnant civilization in millennia or the spark that ignited unimaginable conflicts. But one thing was certain: ignoring humanity was no longer possible. They were here and capable and demanded recognition as equals. How everyone responded would define the next era of galactic history. She sent the message, then joined the celebration, finding Jacob and other human representatives. Raising a container of ceremonial drink, she offered a toast quickly adopted by others. She said to humanity and wished they never lost the qualities that brought them here, even while navigating complicated politics. She hoped everyone would be wise enough to learn from each other rather than fear differences. Jacob raised his glass, adding to new beginnings. Everyone echoed the sentiment. Outside the station, stars shone with infinite possibility. Humanity had taken its place among them, finally free to explore and grow and shape its destiny among countless civilizations. The age of isolation had ended. The age of emergence had begun. The galaxy would never be the same.